The fluorescent lights of the Zenith Corporation lobby hummed, a sterile counterpoint to the simmering tension beneath Jason Statham's skin. He leaned against a faux marble pillar, seemingly engrossed in a discarded newspaper, but his eyes, those ice-blue chips, missed nothing. Zenith Corporation, a monument to technological hubris, was the stage for his latest act. He was there to sniff out corporate espionage, whispers of stolen algorithms, and backroom deals that threatened national security. His contact had been vague. Look for the anomaly. He was weeks into the assignment, and the anomaly remained elusive. Days bled into nights of observing executives with inflated egos and security guards with glazed-over eyes. The mundanity was a weapon, lulling him into a false sense of security, a feeling he couldn't afford. Statham's tailored suit, unremarkable yet expensive, allowed him to blend seamlessly with the visiting dignitaries and tech bros that frequented the lobby. His cover, a consultant, evaluating Zenith's security protocols. A perfect excuse to observe, to analyze, to wait. The lobby itself was a study in sterile power. Gleaming chrome, polished granite, and abstract art that screamed wealth but whispered nothing of substance. It was a cage designed to impress, but to Statham, it was just another stage. He scanned the room again, his gaze lingering on a lone janitor pushing a cleaning cart across the expansive floor. Just another cog in the machine, or perhaps something more? His initial objective was to locate the source of the leak, the individual selling secrets to the highest bidder. He had a list of suspects, each with their own motives and opportunities. But something about the janitor caught his eye, a flicker of vulnerability in an environment of manufactured strength. Statham watched as the janitor, a man who looked like he'd aged a decade in the last 5 years, meticulously wiped down a glass partition. His movements were slow, almost mechanical, a stark contrast to the hurried pace of the executives rushing past him. His uniform, though clean, was noticeably worn, the elbows patched with a darker shade of fabric. A subtle sign, perhaps, but Statham's mind filed it away. The janitor's name tag read Miguel, a common name lost in the sea of corporate anonymity. Miguel's hands, gnarled and calloused, trembled slightly as he squeezed the cleaning spray bottle. He kept glancing nervously at the security cameras, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting something terrible to happen. It wasn't the casual unease of someone simply disliking their job. It was a deeper, more profound anxiety. Statham noticed the way Miguel subtly favored his left leg, a slight limp that he tried to conceal. An old injury? Or something more recent? These small details painted a picture of a man struggling, a man carrying burdens that went far beyond his minimum wage job. Miguel paused, leaning heavily on his mop, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled cigarette pack, his hand shaking as he extracted a single cigarette. He glanced around again, seemingly weighing the consequences before quickly tucking it behind his ear. A small act of rebellion, a brief moment of solace in a life that seemed devoid of joy. Statham's instinct screamed that Miguel was more than just a janitor. He was a pressure point, a vulnerability in the otherwise impenetrable facade of Zenith Corporation. And Statham knew, with a chilling certainty, that something was about to break. The breaking point came swiftly, unexpectedly. Miguel was polishing a brass elevator door when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the device as if it were a venomous snake. He finally pulled it out, his face paling as he read the message. His grip tightened on the phone, knuckles white. A low groan escaped his lips, barely audible above the hum of the ventilation system. He stumbled backward, knocking over his cleaning bucket. The water splashed across the polished floor, creating a dark, spreading stain. He didn't even notice. Miguel's shoulders began to shake. He lowered his head, his body racked with silent sobs. Tears streamed down his face, dripping onto the already damp floor. He muttered something under his breath, a string of broken Spanish phrases that Statham couldn't quite decipher. But the tone was clear, despair, raw, and unfiltered. He sank to his knees, oblivious to the stares of the few remaining employees trickling out of the building. The phone slipped from his grasp, landing with a soft thud on the floor. He buried his face in his hands, his body convulsing with grief. The sound was muffled, but the pain was palpable, radiating outwards like a shockwave. Statham watched, his senses on high alert. This wasn't a simple case of workplace stress. This was a man at the edge, pushed beyond his limits. The message, whatever it contained, had shattered his already fragile composure. The anomaly had revealed itself, not in a data breach or a clandestine meeting, but in the quiet, desperate breakdown of a janitor. And Statham knew, with a grim certainty, that this was just the beginning. Statham didn't move, didn't flinch. He remained a statue carved from granite, seemingly indifferent to the human drama unfolding before him. But inside, his mind was racing, dissecting every nuance of Miguel's breakdown. It wasn't just the sadness, the grief that was evident in the man's slumped posture and choked sobs. There was something else, something darker, lurking beneath the surface. He saw the fear in the way Miguel's eyes darted around the room, even as he wept. It wasn't the fear of being seen, of being vulnerable. It was a primal fear, the kind that comes from being hunted. He noticed the desperation in the way Miguel clutched at his chest, as if trying to contain something that was threatening to explode from within. It wasn't just the desperation of someone facing financial ruin or personal loss. It was the desperation of someone trapped, someone with no way out. And then there was the hint of something hidden, something carefully concealed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Statham caught it. A flicker of calculation in Miguel's eyes, a brief moment of guardedness that belied the utter despair he was displaying. It was as if, even in his moment of deepest vulnerability, Miguel was still trying to protect something, to hide something from the world. Statham's gut told him this wasn't a simple personal crisis. This was something far more complex, something that tied directly into the corporate espionage he was investigating. The breakdown wasn't just an end. It was a beginning to unraveling a web of secrets, lies, and betrayals that ran far deeper than he could have ever imagined. The anomaly wasn't just an individual. It was a network, and Miguel was now a vital thread. The decision was made. Statham couldn't afford to remain a passive observer. He straightened his suit, a subtle gesture of preparation, and moved towards Miguel. His approach was slow, deliberate, minimizing any potential threat. He needed to project calm, control, and a genuine concern, a difficult task given his true nature. Miguel. Statham's voice was low, even carefully devoid of judgment. Miguel flinched, startled. He looked up, his eyes red and swollen, his face streaked with tears. He scrambled to his feet, wiping his face with the back of his hand, a futile attempt to regain some semblance of composure. His eyes darted nervously between Statham and the exit, calculating his escape route. I'm okay, Miguel stammered, his voice hoarse. Just a bad day. Statham didn't buy it for a second. Everyone has bad days, Miguel. But this looks like more than just a bad day. He kept his distance, respecting Miguel's personal space, but his eyes remained locked on the janitor's, searching for any sign of deception. I said I'm okay, Miguel repeated, his voice rising slightly, a hint of defensiveness creeping in. Just leave me alone. He took a step back, bumping into his cleaning cart, sending a bottle of disinfectant crashing to the floor. The sharp, chemical scent filled the air, adding to the already tense atmosphere. Statham held up his hands in a gesture of peace. I just want to help, Miguel. If there's something wrong, something you're afraid of, I can help. He let the words hang in the air, a subtle offer of protection, a silent promise of assistance. But he knew, deep down, that breaking through Miguel's fear would be a long and difficult process. The janitor was trapped, not just by circumstances, but by his own terror. Statham recognized the fear in Miguel's eyes. It was the same fear he'd seen countless times in victims and witnesses, the fear of retribution, of getting caught in something bigger than themselves. He needed to defuse the situation, to create a space where Miguel felt safe enough to talk. Look, Miguel, Statham said, his voice softening. I'm not with Zenith Security. I'm a consultant. I'm here to evaluate vulnerabilities. He chose his words carefully, revealing just enough of his cover to pique Miguel's interest without revealing too much. I saw what happened. I understand that sometimes things happen that we can't control. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, offering it to Miguel. My name is Jason. If you need someone to talk to, someone who will listen without judgment, call me. No pressure. Miguel hesitated, his eyes fixed on the card. He slowly reached out, his fingers brushing against Statham's. The contact was brief, almost imperceptible, but Statham felt a flicker of hope. Vulnerabilities? Miguel repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Statham nodded. Exactly. Sometimes the biggest vulnerabilities aren't in the systems, but in the people. And sometimes those people need help. He paused, allowing the words to sink in. I'm good at helping. Just think about it. He took a step back, giving Miguel space to breathe. He knew he couldn't force him to talk. He had to let Miguel come to him on his own terms. He left the business card on the cleaning cart and turned to walk away, but not before adding, I know what it's like to feel trapped, Miguel. Remember that. The seed was planted. Now he just had to wait. 2 days later, Statham's phone rang. It was an anonymous number. He answered. Jason. The voice was raspy, hesitant. It was Miguel. They met at a small, out-of-the-way diner, a place where secrets could be whispered without fear of prying ears. Miguel looked even worse than before, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling. He barely touched his coffee. I need help, he finally said, his voice cracking. The story that unfolded was a tapestry of desperation and misfortune. Miguel's youngest daughter, Sophia, was sick, a rare form of leukemia. The medical bills were astronomical, far beyond his meager janitor's salary. He'd taken out loans, maxed out credit cards, but it wasn't enough. Then came the debts. He'd fallen behind on payments, and a local gang had started to apply pressure. Threats against his family, veiled at first, but increasingly explicit. He'd been trying to shield his wife and children, working extra shifts, selling everything he owned, but it was a losing battle. They want me to do something, Miguel confessed, his voice barely audible. Something bad. They said if I don't, they'll hurt Sophia. Statham listened intently, his face impassive, but his mind was racing. The gang, the sick child, the mounting debts, it all painted a picture of a man backed into a corner, vulnerable to exploitation. But something didn't quite add up. Miguel was still holding back, carefully omitting certain details, shielding something from Statham's gaze. The pieces were there, but they didn't quite fit. The full truth remained hidden, lurking just beneath the surface of Miguel's desperate confession. Statham knew he had to tread carefully. One wrong move, and the entire fragile structure could collapse. What exactly do they want you to do, Miguel? Statham asked, his voice calm and measured. He needed the details, the specifics. Miguel hesitated, his eyes darting around the diner. He lowered his voice even further. They want me to leave a door unlocked. A specific door. On the 42nd floor. The 42nd floor. Statham's mind clicked into high gear. That was the location of Zenith Corporation's Research and Development Division, the heart of their proprietary technology. Access to that floor was heavily restricted, requiring multiple levels of security clearance. A door left unlocked. It was an invitation. Which door, Miguel? Be specific. The server room. Door 42B, Miguel said, his voice trembling. They said someone will come to collect. The Blue Lotus. The Blue Lotus? Statham repeated, his eyes narrowing. It was a coded phrase, a trigger. He'd heard whispers of it in his briefing, a reference to a highly sensitive algorithm that Zenith was developing, an algorithm that could revolutionize artificial intelligence. It was the very thing he was sent to protect. The pieces were falling into place. The gang wasn't just a random group of thugs. They were connected to something bigger, something more sophisticated. They were being used as pawns in a corporate espionage scheme. And Miguel, desperate to save his daughter, was the unwitting key. Did they mention any names, Miguel? Anyone at Zenith? Statham pressed, his focus intensifying. Miguel shook his head, his face pale. No, just the Blue Lotus. And door 42B. That was enough. Statham now had a direct link between Miguel's personal crisis and his original mission. The anomaly wasn't just Miguel's breakdown. It was the convergence of his desperation and a high-stakes corporate plot. Statham leaned forward, his gaze intense but not accusatory. Miguel, you're in deep. And these people, they won't hesitate to hurt your family if you don't cooperate. But you have to understand, helping them will make things even worse. You'll be complicit in stealing something that could have devastating consequences. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. I can help you, Miguel. I can protect your family. But I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you sure they didn't mention anyone else? Anyone at all connected to Zenith? Think hard. Miguel wrung his hands, his face etched with anxiety. He was torn between his fear of the gang and a growing sense of loyalty to Statham, a man who had offered him a lifeline in his darkest hour. He knew he was withholding information, protecting someone, but the pressure was mounting. There was one thing, Miguel stammered, his voice barely a whisper. They said to trust no one, especially not Mr. Harding. Mr. Harding, Zenith Corporation's head of research and development, the very man in charge of the Blue Lotus algorithm. Statham's suspicions solidified. Harding was either involved or a target. Either way, he was a key piece of the puzzle. Tell me everything you know about Mr. Harding, Miguel. Everything, no matter how insignificant it may seem. Statham's voice was firm, but laced with empathy. He understood the agonizing choice Miguel faced. But the stakes were too high to allow sentiment to cloud his judgment. He needed the truth, the whole truth, if he was going to protect Miguel and prevent the theft of the Blue Lotus. The scene dissolved, replaced by a flashback. Miguel, months earlier, standing outside a small, rundown clinic. He looked younger, less burdened, but still worn down by the weight of his responsibilities. A man approached him, slick and well-dressed, a stark contrast to Miguel's humble attire. Mr. Rodriguez, the man asked, his voice smooth and persuasive. I understand your daughter is sick. The man introduced himself as a representative from a charitable organization, offering assistance with Sophia's medical bills. He was charming, empathetic, and incredibly convincing. He offered Miguel a loan, a substantial amount, with surprisingly lenient terms. All he asked in return was a small favor. The scene shifted. Miguel, back at Zenith Corporation, cleaning Mr. Harding's office. The man from the charitable organization had asked him to simply observe Harding, to note his comings and goings, to report any unusual behavior. He emphasized that it was just a routine check, a way to ensure Harding wasn't misusing company resources. Another scene, Miguel receiving a small, unmarked package from the man. He was instructed to place it in a specific location, a drop-off point inside Zenith Corporation. He was assured that it contained only harmless documents, that it was a simple administrative task. The final scene, Miguel being confronted by members of the local gang. They knew about the loan, about Sophia's illness. They threatened to expose him, to ruin his life, unless he agreed to cooperate further. He was trapped, ensnared in a web of lies and deceit, his good intentions twisted against him. The flashback ended, leaving Statham with a clearer understanding of Miguel's plight. He wasn't a willing accomplice, but a victim, manipulated and exploited by ruthless individuals who preyed on his vulnerability. The diner door swung open, a bell chiming discordantly. A man entered, his eyes scanning the room with a predatory intensity. He was large, muscular, with a shaved head and a distinct scar running down his left cheek. He moved with a purpose, his presence radiating menace. Statham recognized the type, a professional enforcer, someone accustomed to violence. He subtly shifted his position, placing himself between Miguel and the door. The man's gaze locked onto Miguel, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Rodriguez, the man growled, his voice low and gravelly. We need to talk. Miguel visibly recoiled, his face draining of color. He looked at Statham, his eyes pleading for help. The man started to move towards them, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Statham knew he couldn't wait. He stood up abruptly, blocking the man's path. "He's with me," Statham said, his voice calm but firm. The man stopped, his eyes narrowing. He assessed Statham, evaluating the threat. "This doesn't concern you. Step aside." "It concerns me when people try to intimidate my friends," Statham replied, his hand subtly reaching inside his own jacket. The tension in the diner thickened, the air crackling with unspoken threats. Other patrons, sensing the danger, began to edge away, their eyes wide with fear. The confrontation was about to escalate, and Statham knew that things were about to get very messy very quickly. The game had changed. It was no longer just about corporate espionage. It was about survival. The enforcer didn't hesitate. He lunged, his hand emerging from his jacket, revealing a glint of steel. Statham reacted instantly. He grabbed Miguel, pulling him behind him, using him as a shield. In the same motion, he delivered a swift, precise kick to the enforcer's knee, buckling his leg. The enforcer cried out in pain, stumbling forward. Statham followed up with a brutal elbow strike to the man's temple, sending him crashing into a nearby table. Dishes shattered, coffee spilled, and the diner erupted in chaos. Statham grabbed Miguel's arm, pulling him towards the back exit. "Move! Now," he barked. They burst out of the diner and into a narrow alleyway. The enforcer was already recovering, staggering to his feet, his face contorted with rage. He pulled out a handgun and fired a shot, the bullet whizzing past Statham's head. Statham shoved Miguel behind a dumpster and drew his own weapon, a compact Glock 19. He returned fire, 2 quick shots, forcing the enforcer to take cover. He knew they couldn't stay there. The enforcer would call for backup, and they'd be trapped. He grabbed Miguel again, pulling him through the maze of alleyways, using his knowledge of the city to evade pursuit. He moved with a calculated efficiency, his every action designed to protect Miguel and neutralize the threat. The violence was brutal, but controlled, a necessary evil to ensure their survival. This wasn't a Hollywood shootout. It was a desperate fight for survival, a chess game played with bullets and broken bones. Statham led Miguel to a small, nondescript motel on the outskirts of the city. The room was Spartan, clean, but impersonal, a temporary haven from the storm raging around them. He checked the room for surveillance, a routine precaution, before turning to Miguel. Miguel was a mess, his clothes torn, his face bruised, his eyes wide with shock. He sat on the edge of the bed, trembling uncontrollably. "They were going to kill me," he stammered, his voice barely audible. "They're not going to kill you," Statham said, his voice firm, reassuring. "Not while I'm around." He handed Miguel a bottle of water. "Drink this. You need to calm down." Miguel took a tentative sip, his eyes never leaving Statham's. What do we do now?" "Now, we talk," Statham replied. "We figure out who's behind this, and we stop them." He sat down across from Miguel, his gaze unwavering. "You're going to have to trust me, Miguel. Completely. No more secrets. No more half-truths. Your life and your daughter's life depends on it." He paused, giving Miguel a moment to gather his thoughts. "Tell me everything you know about Mr. Harding. Everything. What kind of man is he? What are his habits? Who does he associate with? Anything, no matter how insignificant it may seem." The time for subtlety was over. The enforcer's arrival had made it clear. The stakes had been raised, and the gloves were off. Under Statham's relentless but understanding questioning, Miguel finally cracked. The dam of fear and guilt broke, and the truth poured out. It turned out Miguel had been cleaning Harding's office for years and had noticed a pattern. Harding would often work late, seemingly engrossed in his research, but Miguel had observed him making furtive phone calls, always speaking in hushed tones, always using a burner phone. More significantly, Miguel had seen Harding meeting with a woman who didn't work at Zenith Corporation. He described her in detail, tall, elegant, with a distinctive birthmark on her neck. He'd seen them exchanging packages, small and discreet, in Harding's office. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, dismissing it as a personal affair. But now, in the context of everything else, it seemed significant. But the key piece of information was something Miguel had overheard just a few weeks prior. Harding had been on the phone, arguing with someone. Miguel couldn't make out the entire conversation, but he clearly heard Harding say, "The lotus will bloom on Friday. Make sure everything is in place." Friday. That was tomorrow. Statham's mind raced. The woman, the meetings, the phone calls, the coded phrase. It all pointed to a carefully orchestrated plan to steal the Blue Lotus algorithm. And Harding was at the center of it. Miguel had unwittingly provided Statham with the final piece of the puzzle, the confirmation he needed to act. Statham paced the small motel room, his mind weighing the options. He had the information he needed to stop the theft, but the question was, how? He could use Miguel as bait, send him back to Zenith Corporation to play his part, allowing Statham to observe the operation, identify the woman, and catch Harding red-handed. It was the most efficient way to expose the entire network, to unravel the conspiracy completely. But it was also the most dangerous option for Miguel. Sending him back into the lion's den would put him in mortal peril. The enforcer was just the tip of the iceberg. There were likely other players involved, people who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate Miguel if they suspected he was cooperating with the authorities. He could also choose to protect Miguel, keep him hidden, and try to stop the theft without him. This would minimize the risk to Miguel, but it would also compromise the mission. He might only be able to catch Harding, leaving the rest of the network to operate freely. It was a less satisfying outcome, but it would ensure Miguel's safety. Statham stopped pacing and looked at Miguel, who was watching him with a mixture of hope and fear. He saw a man who had been manipulated, exploited, and pushed to the brink. A man who deserved a second chance. The decision was agonizing, a conflict between duty and conscience. But in the end, Statham knew what he had to do. He couldn't sacrifice Miguel for the sake of a more complete victory. Some lines you just don't cross. "We're not going to send you back there, Miguel," Statham said, his voice resolute. "It's too dangerous. I'll handle this." Miguel looked relieved, but also apprehensive. "But how? They'll know I told you something. They'll hurt Sophia." "I won't let them," Statham said, his eyes hardening. "I have a plan. It's risky, but it's the best way to protect you and stop Harding." He outlined his plan. Miguel would call in sick tomorrow, creating a believable excuse for his absence. Statham would use his consultant credentials to gain access to Zenith Corporation, claiming he needed to conduct a thorough security audit of the 42nd floor. He would focus on Harding, observing his movements, and waiting for the woman to appear. "I need you to stay here, Miguel," Statham said. "Keep your phone on. If anything changes, if they contact you, call me immediately." He also gave Miguel a new phone, a secure line that couldn't be traced. "What about Sophia?" Miguel asked, his voice filled with concern. "I'll take care of Sophia," Statham assured him. "I'll make sure she's safe." He had resources, contacts, people who could provide discreet protection. He knew the plan was far from perfect. It was a gamble, a calculated risk. But it was the only way he could see to protect Miguel and still have a chance of stopping Harding. He would be walking into a trap, alone, but he was prepared. He always was. Justice, and a sense of empathy for Miguel, had driven him to this decision. Now it was time to execute. Friday morning dawned gray and overcast, mirroring the tension in Statham's gut. He arrived at Zenith Corporation, flashing his consultant badge at security. He requested access to the 42nd floor, citing the urgent need for a comprehensive security audit. He used the information Miguel had provided to subtly influence the security personnel, mentioning specific protocols and access points, impressing them with his apparent knowledge. He made his way to the 42nd floor, the air growing noticeably colder as he approached the Research and Development Division. He located Harding's office, a corner suite with panoramic views of the city. He positioned himself in a nearby observation area, pretending to study blueprints, but his eyes were fixed on Harding's door. Hours crawled by. Harding arrived, seemingly preoccupied, his face etched with worry. He made several phone calls, pacing back and forth, his voice low and agitated. Statham observed everything, analyzing his body language, searching for any sign of deception. Around midday, a woman arrived. She was tall, elegant, and Statham immediately recognized the distinctive birthmark on her neck. It was the woman Miguel had described. She entered Harding's office, and the door closed behind her. Statham tensed, his senses on high alert. This was it, the moment of truth. He moved closer to Harding's office, his hand resting on the Glock concealed beneath his jacket. The lotus was about to bloom. After what felt like an eternity, the door to Harding's office opened. The woman emerged, carrying a small briefcase. Harding followed, his face pale and sweating. Statham stepped out of the shadows, blocking their path. "Mr. Harding," Statham said, his voice cold and authoritative. "I need to ask you a few questions." Harding's eyes widened in panic. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb, Harding," Statham said, his gaze fixed on the briefcase. "I know about the Blue Lotus. I know about your meetings with this woman." The woman's expression hardened. She reached into her purse, pulling out a silenced pistol. "This doesn't concern you. Just walk away." "I can't do that," Statham said, his hand moving to his own weapon. "I'm here to protect the Blue Lotus." A tense standoff ensued. Harding, caught in the middle, looked like a deer in headlights. The woman was clearly a professional, her eyes cold and calculating. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "This is bigger than you." "Maybe," Statham replied, "but I'm not afraid of big." The woman lunged, firing a shot. Statham ducked, the bullet whizzing past his ear. He returned fire, 2 quick shots, forcing the woman to take cover behind a desk. Harding screamed and cowered on the floor. The battle had begun. It was a clash of skill, a test of strength and wits. Statham knew he was outnumbered, outgunned, but he had a mission to complete, and he wouldn't let anything stand in his way. The firefight was short, brutal, and decisive. Statham, with his superior training and experience, quickly gained the upper hand. He disarmed the woman, rendering her weapon useless. He then subdued her with a series of precise strikes, incapacitating her without causing any permanent damage. Harding, witnessing the carnage, finally snapped. He lunged at Statham, grabbing a letter opener from his desk. Statham easily sidestepped the attack and disarmed Harding, pinning him against the wall. "Where is it, Harding?" Statham demanded, his voice cold and menacing. "Where's the Blue Lotus?" Harding, terrified, confessed everything. He'd been working with the woman, a corporate spy, for months, feeding her information in exchange for money. He'd already copied the Blue Lotus algorithm onto a portable drive, which was now in the briefcase. Statham retrieved the briefcase, securing the stolen data. He then contacted his superiors, informing them of the situation. Within minutes, Zenith Corporation Security, along with a team of federal agents, arrived on the scene. Harding and the woman were taken into custody, their plot foiled. The threat to the Blue Lotus had been neutralized. The corporate espionage had been stopped. Statham's mission was complete. Statham ensured Miguel was safe, relocating him and his family to a secure location far from the reach of the gang. He used his connections to arrange for Sophia to receive the best possible medical care. Her chances of recovery significantly improved. The debts were quietly taken care of, and Miguel was given a new identity, a fresh start. A few weeks later, Statham visited Miguel. He found him working at a small, family-owned business, his face etched with contentment. Sophia was recovering well, her laughter filling the air. Miguel shook Statham's hand, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You saved my life. You saved my family." Statham simply nodded, offering a faint smile. He couldn't take credit for everything. Miguel had been brave, had made the right choices, even when faced with impossible odds. He had been his own savior, in a way. Statham turned and walked away, disappearing back into the shadows. He had a mission to complete, a world to protect. But he would never forget Miguel, the janitor who had broken down in tears, the man who had reminded him that even in the darkest corners of the world, there was still hope, still compassion, still humanity. The mission was complete, the Blue Lotus was safe. But Statham was left with a lingering sense of the human cost, a reminder that even in the world of espionage and intrigue, the lives of ordinary people mattered.